Only a couple months now. I think I recognize her.
Welcome to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee, and my next guest makes bold, bright paintings, light-filled photographs, and bite-sized essays about possibility, perspective, gratitude, and wonder. Please welcome Emily Gaines Demsky. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. I like some of the latter part of there, possibility, perspective. I had some questions about that. But I want to open it up in that way that some people are like, I can do the whole podcast this way. And other people are like, can we get from this part to the next question? Tell me about yourself. How do you, what's the Emily Gaines Demsky story? How do you get here? Where are we coming from?
That's a big question, Rob.
I know, right?
Question. But here's what I'll tell you. So when I was 25, three things happened in quick succession in the span of a couple months. My father died. My maternal grandmother had a massive stroke that left her paralyzed and bedridden. And I gave birth to my first child, my son, all in the span of just a couple months.
Wow.
And my whole life was turned upside down. I had been working in arts administration. I left my job. And let me just back up and say this. So Thanksgiving before my father died. So this is Thanksgiving 1998. We always ask everyone to come to the table prepared to say what they're thankful for. And most people say like the cranberries or my family. So that year, my father was really sick and he came with this handwritten page that has become like our family's Thanksgiving prayer. We read it every year. And it included the words, I am thankful for the blessings of life and love and for the lessons I am privileged to extract from my trials and tribulations. Wow. And that became like the frame for my life. So my father died, fast forward a few months, my father dies, my grandmother has this stroke, I have this baby, my life is turned upside down, and I was determined to follow that example. What are the lessons that I'm privileged to extract from my trials and tribulations? So sort of tilted me in a new direction. And eventually that led toward my creative work.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Whenever there's like something that comes from the personal side, and it's definitely something that resonates, we all have families. We all kind of like, as we're recording this, we're in November. So that's something that's also top of mind as well. Yeah. And even coming out of the last few years with just being more aware of all of the stuff that goes around us and having that, I think in some instances, collective reset. I thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, no, I think it's true. And I think in the last few years also, we're acutely aware of our personal and our collective trials and tribulations, right? Like it's so present for us now that everybody struggles, right? Everybody struggles. You never know what someone else is dealing with.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
when it comes to, early on, you mentioned arts administrative work, being in that sort of like lane. What was your first experience where like art popped for you? Like you were like, oh, there's a painting that I liked, or, I was like, coloring a little bit. What was that first experience with art for you?
No, that's a great question. And so I do have this like image of myself at 11 in the driveway with this glitter, but no. So my dad was a painter. He was a lawyer by day and he was a watercolor painter and a poet by night. And I think I never identified as an artist because he was an artist and he made like the kind of watercolor paintings, like of a still life where you can see the reflection in the copper kettle, like super realistic. Yeah. And so that was art in my mind. And I didn't identify as an artist until much, much, much later. But he had this big blue art bin with all of his supplies. And I had a little blue art bin and I would like sit beside him and, like little sketchbooks and watercolors. So that was really those are my formative memories of making art besides the glitter.
That's really cool. I always think back to, I got this, my grandmother used to like really sew like a lot of different stuff. And to the degree where she made clothing out of like old like adult clothing for my brother and I's teddy bears.
That's so cool.
So I remember she took a bag that my dad had when he was younger, and she took different bits of fabric from he's a veteran, so different bits of fabric from maybe a duffel bag from the Marines, what have you, and made my art bag for me. So all of my art materials would be in there. So it's like taking from my dad's childhood and, you know, some of his stuff growing up. So I had all of my, because I wanted to be a comic book artist, all of my old color pencils and art books and Wizard magazine and all of that stuff in there. And that's pretty much how far I go back and thinking about it, like sketching and trying to do that stuff and having these bags at times. If you see me in person, this is going to really resonate, at times bigger than I am. So,
Wow.
So yeah, you know, just a lot of stuff.
Because then we carry those generations with us. Like that's all part of our story.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm always interested in learning about like imagination and creativity from creatives. So what are some of the things that fuel your imagination? Because I recognize in reading over like doing some of the research that, you know, there are maybe imagery that comes from, and we'll talk about a little bit later, but imagery that comes from maybe experiences and things of that nature. But in terms of the imagination and how to present it in a certain way, where does that come from?
Yeah, no, great question. So I paint typically, I paint flowers and horizons. And horizons, I call them horizons, like landscapes with big sky, usually.
Sure.
And I paint those two subjects because for me, they are the ultimate symbols of hope and possibility. So the flower grows out of the little seed that's buried beneath the surface of the earth in the dark and then pushes through that soil to grow up into the light. Like for me, that's what I aspire to, right? To come out of that darkness and grow into the light. And then the horizon, like it's the expansive possibility. So for me, those are the things that fuel my creativity. And that's where my imagery comes from. And lots of times I will paint with flowers before me, and lots of times I am painting those. They are not necessarily the tulip, the sunflower, but they are flower, and it is representative.
Like that. So when you come to that point where you're comfortable with using the term artist, right? And that's the thing, because it's interesting. Like, I've had people tell me, "Oh, you're this, you're that," and I'm like, "I'm just a dude that has a microphone." It's like, "You're an anthropologist, you're an artist, you're doing all types of stuff, you're a journalist." I was like, "Sure, I guess," and it's like I'm all of that and none of that, or what have you. And audio artist is another one of the things that are out there, and my perspective is that of an artist, and I think having these sorts of conversations help kind of fuel and help like impact that realization. Describe like your relationship with the term artist, how you view yourself as an artist, things of the sort.
Was a journey to get there. I don't have any degree from an art school. I don't have credentials as an artist. So it really took a lot of work to get to the point where I could call myself an artist. And lots of times I'll say I'm a painter because it seems easier than saying I'm an artist, even though my work goes beyond painting. So I submitted my work to a gallery for the first time when my kids were really little. And I remember taking this folder with a CD to the gallery. And I remember picking my kids up from school that day, and they get in the car. And I said to them, like, my daughter was in preschool, I think like 3 or 4. And I said, today I did a really big thing. Like, I submitted my work to this gallery. And even if they don't want to show the work, like, I feel like that was like, I was successful today because I did this hard thing. I think it's hard to like claim that label without some. I think it's easier if you have an external like stamp, like here's my credentials. But if you don't have that, then it's about claiming it for yourself. And I believe, Rob, that we're all artists. Like when people say, I'm not an artist or I don't have any creative abilities, I don't believe that. I believe we all have it. It's just how we express it. Yeah. And so it was a lot of work to get to claiming it. But I think, showing work in a gallery, selling work, receiving money in exchange for the work, it helps to give myself my own credentials, I guess.
Yeah. No, that's important because that sort of credentialing process, if you will, it's not always the most inclusive situation, and it's based on folks' individual tastes and so on. And you have these notions of king and queen makers, and that's fine, and there's a place for that. But also, I think who's doing work, who's consistently doing work, and I go to this quote, or maybe it's paraphrasing, but this piece from like Sam Jackson, and he's talking about like, I'm an actor because I've come from a family of people who are working, that are always working. So I'm always working. I'm always acting. That's my job, my vocation, my calling.
Wow.
So I think that desire to do it, like, like for instance, the recognition of doing a podcast as art we're not quite there yet, but I'm working on stuff all the time. I have a process. I go about it. It's certain things that seem more and more like an artist, but it's not in that approved upon definition yet.
Right. Well, and again, I would say that's an external definition, right? And we may get to make the definition. I mean, I would say, I'm guessing, tell me if I'm wrong, but for you in the work that you do, and I know for me in the work that I do, it's about the way we see the world and the way we interact with the world and the way we express what we see in the world. And like, conversation is art.
Yeah.
Lots of times, I mean, I became an artist and a mother sort of simultaneously. Like, I sort of embodied the notion of being an artist as I was becoming a mother. Sure. And there were lots of days where I wasn't making any art, but like but dinner was the art, right? If I made
Sure.
or the brownies were the art, or the bread that I baked or whatever. Like, there were other ways of expressing that. And I feel like conversation is one of those.
Yeah, there are some people that do bad conversations. It's like, what are we talking about? It just goes nowhere. It's like, so from where you started, and we're talking, about like, this journey a little bit, you touched on earlier, from where you started and kind of like exploring in these sort of nascent stages of exploring art to where you're on now. Let's talk about some of the milestones in that period, or what have you, maybe in education, maybe in experiences that served as that sort of supplemental education, because not everybody goes to art school, obviously. So, and also I wanted to hear about maybe if you have an exhibition or an event that, that you may have attended and you've seen, like, yeah, I'm doing what I should be doing. I like this person's work. This is informing me. This is helping. This is serving me. Tell me about that.
Okay, so it's like super recent. The way I answer is super recent. I mean, I could tell you about others in the past, but
sure.
Joan Mitchell exhibit at the BMA this summer. Did you see it?
I missed it, unfortunately. I was so busy.
Okay, so I went. Rob, I'm not kidding you. I went every single week for like the first 4 months. Like, I just felt like I was bathing in her paintings. Yeah. They, to me, feel like an expression. She painted a lot of flower. There's a lot of flower imagery, sunflower imagery, but it's very, very, very abstracted. And it felt to me just like this expression of flowers, or this expression of what I am always trying to express in this most fundamental and organic way. I loved that exhibit. That was a really good one.
That's wonderful. That is wonderful. I think when we encounter something that it just informs us, it's just like, if I were to go to see in terms of my lane or the thing that I'm pursuing, I go back to when I had a conversation with LaFontaine Oliver, or even Aaron Henkin, or even Sam Suss. I had to put my light on, or any of the folks that are in the sort of like radio space and the, sort of that storytelling space. It's like, wow, they may have found that question impressive, or, listening to them talk about it, it's like, oh, there is a path that this makes sense for me. I don't feel like I'm faking it, or I feel like I'm an outsider, and things of that nature. And sometimes kind of getting that, it just gives you that newfound confidence, I guess.
I agree. And I think also seeing how other people express themselves expands for me my idea of how I can express myself. Not to say that I want to do what she does or do what he does, but I see, oh, this is something I've never seen before, right? She's doing her thing the same way I'm doing my thing. And it's kind of empowering in a way to remember, like, this is my journey. And there are so many other journeys, and mine's before me.
Yeah, I'll make a ridiculous reference here because I'm filled with ridiculous references. One of the shows that I got really into was the show Hannibal. And I just remember Will Graham's character just kind of like, framing out what a particular crime scene might look like. And he'll say, this is my design. And that's what I find myself doing all the time. And for me, it connects like, this is my process. This is how I'm going about it. And I don't know, just being able to hold my own in a conversation with people who are doing wildly creative things, sometimes of which I have no idea what they're saying. It's like, yeah, go on, tell me more. And it's just like, wow, this is great. And I think just being around it, being in a company of creatives, it's going to pull something out of you.
Yeah. Yeah. And Rob, one of the things I love about what you do is that you do it your way. Like, you record however many you record, you put, like, you have as many conversations you have, like, lots of people are recording or putting out once a week or twice a week or whatever. It's like, you're doing it your way. That's the idea. I have to remind myself all the time. The idea is for me to do it my way, not anybody else's way. All those other ways have already been done, right? This is my way.
It makes that, that uniquely sort of Emily approach, it makes it that much more. It's like, this is the way that I'm doing it.
Yes.
So I read you describe your work as reminders. Can you speak more about the meaning behind that sort of description?
Yeah. So I feel like the world, the way I see it, the world is reminding us all of the time that it is hard and scary and dark and very much not the sort of vision of the world as I wish it were. The headlines, the news, the social media posts, like, there's just so much hard in our lives, in our communities, in our friends, in our city, in our country, beyond. And for me, my paintings, my writing, all of my work, I hope reminds us that there is brightness, there is beauty, there is goodness. Even when it seems so dark, we can go through that soil to find the points of light, that the points of light are there, and we can set our gaze to those. So that's what I mean when I say reminders. I'll just expand on it and say one other piece, Rob, which is that I believe we get what we honor, what we hold up, and that we have so much, like, our movies, our television series are like so much like death and destruction and violence. And I get that there's a hero story in that also, but I think that if we want more goodness, we have to elevate more goodness. And that we can do that, that's in our power. And so that's really part of my message. And that's what I mean by reminders.
I dig that. It's three instances that come to mind recently that I have a friend who is a podcaster as well. And I'm a strategist. I have that sort of approach to how I go about things. And, I'm on a call with him and his team, and, they're like, why do you want to help him? I was like, because he's my friend. That's the thing I want to do. And it was just natural. It wasn't like in my impulse in many instances. How can I help? How can I make this process easier for somebody? And sometimes some of the weirdest responses of like pushback or nah, bro, or what have you. And it's like, I'm just earnestly helping. That's just a thing that I'm interested in doing, because I always have 3 or 4 or 5 different ways to go about something. And it's like, here's something from the toolkit. And I remember speaking with someone relatively, high up person in the sort of media space. And we had, moved a meeting a couple of times. He had a few things that presented themselves and just had to reschedule. And when we got connected and we actually, got together on the call, he was just like, yeah, so, I just wanted to get an idea what you want to talk about. And I was like, I dig what you're doing, and I wanted to chat with you and maybe learn a bit from you, kind of sort of mentor capacity, what have you. And he's like, wow. He's like, people don't do that anymore. And it just, he was like, I don't give out my number. Here, please take my number. Let's stay in touch. And we talked, for a guy that's very busy in this sort of president role that he's in this organization. He gave me like 30 minutes of his time, and I recognize in doing this, doing these series of podcasts and then the rate in which I'm doing it, people like time is a commodity that we don't have a lot of. And I try to be as mindful of folks' time and understanding. It's not always reciprocated in that way, but more often than not, it is. And communication, right? And we kind of, as you were touching on a little bit, I think with the social media component, I'm going to hide your messages. I don't want to see this message. It's like communicate, talk to a person, have this sort of connection. And the last thing I'll say in this regard is it's kind of one of the things I was told people about. It's like, oh, are you trying to scale this? What are you trying to do with this? I was like, I'm here to make friends, man. That's literally what it is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love that, but I also think from my perspective, you're building community, like you're creating community. But can I go back to one other thing you were saying?
Sure,
about I had a professor in college, my freshman year, I took Introduction to Theater, and the professor used to talk about how he ran a small, I guess in his previous life, he had run a small community theater outside of Minneapolis. So in Minneapolis, there's the Guthrie Theater. It's a huge regional theater, well-respected, well-known. And he said, people used to say to him, but you have this competition. Like, why are, how does that work? You have this competition. And he said, good theater begets good theater.
Mm.
It's right. Good podcasting begets good podcasting. Good artwork begets good art. Like the more we elevate it, the more we create space for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that kind of brings me to it, because I think I was circling around it a little bit. Let's talk about what is a flight deck?
Yeah. So the flight deck is my creation. It's 28 cards, deck of cards. On one side, there's artwork. It's fragments of my paintings. And on the other side, there are actions, really simple actions, questions, and affirmations that you can say to yourself or out loud. They're all designed to help you, help me, help anyone when we're feeling stuck, whether it's like cranky, bad mood, can't get motivated, like you just notice you're in a headspace that you can't shake yourself out of. Yeah. So simple things like sit down if you're standing up and stand up if you're sitting down, open the window, go outside, what's the good news? Like, tell me the good news. There's always some good news. Tell me some good news. So, really simple things that can be used either one a day for 28 days, or shuffle the deck and pull a card, or tape one to your bathroom mirror, or like put one in a note you send to a friend. I created this because that was my own practice. Like, that's what I would do when I was feeling stuck. Yeah. These are my tools for myself. And I created it in the fall of 2019 when stuck was an idea, right? Like, what does it mean to be stuck? And it resonated and like sold out the first printing, sold out the second printing. And then fast forward to March of 2020. And all of a sudden, everybody is now stuck. Yeah. And it really like helped me and helped a lot of people through that time, just sort of remembering that we may feel stuck, but the tagline for the flight deck is shift your perspective, shift your life. And, it helps you do that.
That's great. I dig that. And I may have added a couple rapid fire questions as a result of that, okay. Just so you know. So this is not necessarily in the same vein, but I think it's worth asking. Shifting perspectives, right? Have you had a time to maybe experiment with other art practices, other mediums, things of that nature? And was that, in taking that shift, was that something that maybe improved maybe the painting, maybe the photography, maybe the writing? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Good question. So, yes, in lots of different times and lots of different ways, some by choice, right? Like I had a period of time where I was experimenting with encaustic monotype making, and it was great in that moment. And I loved doing it. And I ultimately realized like, this is not my path forward. But it informed what I did. When the pandemic started, I moved all of my working to the dining room table in my house. So I went from like making big paintings on wood panel to making small paintings in watercolor at my dining room table. And I feel like we always learn something. Like any limitation we give ourselves creates new opportunities and new pathways. So, I did a whole series once where I painted only with my non-dominant hand. Lots of things. I like to experiment.
It's almost as if you have the questions in front of you, because this absolutely goes into this next question I have about limitations. Because I kind of read about that, where the Dr. Seuss story of I'm only going to use 50 words in this book, and it's what green eggs and ham or cat in the hat. I'm not quite sure, but it was a bet. Or sometimes I like to add in goofy things of I'll quasi purposely forget maybe a card or for my primary recording device if I'm recording out of studio. And I'm like, how am I going to MacGyver this one? So my problem solving part of my mind kind of kicks in. And then it opens up new questions and like, damn, how did they do that? I wonder how they do that. And now it gets into a deeper, richer sort of conversation with the guest. What sort of limitations, and you touched on a few, like, painting with your non-dominant hand and such, but what sorts of limitations do you put in? Like, do you often find yourself kind of going back to like, I only want to work in this color, or I only want to do things of this size or this scale? Tell me about that.
Yeah. So I do, like, I have given myself limitations of these are the colors, or everything's going to be in this size for a period of time. But the thing I've done that's been the most unlocking for me has been time-defined projects. So I've done a number of like, for 30 days, I'm going to do this. So I've done that a few times. That was hugely transformative. I've done 6 times. I've done the 100-day project, where for 100 days in a row, I do something. And like transformative on so many levels. But I would say the fact that you have to then push through the monotony of it, like you're like through the muck to get to the other side where the treasure is, kind of, that for me has been huge.
Yeah, I always think of the variety pack of oatmeal scenario. No one's taking every flavor in that pack. We're all ignoring the raisin flavor. Nobody wants that. It's apple, cinnamon, and brown sugar, all the time. And that's the way I look at the colors of the different choices that we might have. Like, I've tried to curtail how I go about this podcast. It's very rare that I do an hour-long interview, and the purpose is not to do the interview that ends all interviews. It's an interview to kind of get the guest at a moment in time where something may be going on, something's new, and potentially we go back and talk again when there's another big thing that's happening, or another thing that's small, or another thing that's just interesting. And, I think once I came to that realization, because, as you probably heard, I've been doing podcasting for a very long time, and not having those sort of bumpers around me and be able to just really do it my way. But I think redefining what my way might look like, and limitations are baked in there. And sometimes even going to it, I don't even write questions sometimes. And I remember at a point, it would be guests that say, "Oh, I don't read the questions anyway. Send them away. But I'm not going to read them." And it's like, "Oh, okay, cool." And I'm like, "Oh, so we're just going to free jazz it and improvise and see what we get." And, those interviews, I can tell, and not everyone listening can, but I can tell, it's like, yeah, I'm prepared, but I didn't write any questions.
Did you freeze?
No, we're good. We're good here. We're good here. And, I can recognize that those instances, when questions are kind of like written out, and even at times when I feel like the answers to those questions were a little bit more rehearsed than authentic and kind of just like out there. It's like, this is off the cuff. This is all contrived. We know that. But, I think when a person may get a question in a different way, I was on a panel. I was moderating a panel the other day, and we had all the questions. They were all kind of scripted out, and there was a panel with actors, and I threw in one curveball that none of them had. They were like, "Oh," Yeah, actually, I do have something to say about that. And now is the point of the moderation that it turned, because I really don't do moderations. And I don't know if how good I am at it. That's something I'm developing in. But once I was able to rest on what I do and kind of work within the parameters of what I have, I was able to show my true self and what my skill is.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a painting mentor who said, painting is letting things happen.
Mm.
I definitely tend toward like, I'm going to control this. And, but I mean, I practically like say it to myself while I'm painting, like I am letting things happen.
Yeah.
Rather than making things happen. Like I could make things happen all day, but this letting things happen is for me, the art's in there.
Are you a doodler?
Am I a doodler? I'm a I write a lot I use a fountain pen and a notebook, and I write in script. It's very, very messy. That's really just like dumping things out of my head. So you can't really go back and read what it says. That's kind of my doodle.
Yeah.
And then I'll like sort of like rough sketch things sometimes, like if I'm, bored in a meeting or something. Yeah.
I find myself drawing either faces or not, I guess not sigils. I just think of the Game of Thrones, emblems or what have you. I find myself drawing something that's reminiscent of that. So, bored in a meeting, it's like, and then I look at it later. Yeah.
Always flowers for me. It's always flowers. Like it's either those like loopy words, those like loopy scribble, or it's flowers.
So here's the last real question that I got for you. And I got some rapid fire questions after this. So pursuing art, and I've really been in this book about called Death of an Artist. So if you haven't read it, I'd recommend checking it out. Pursuing art isn't easy with big business and kind of getting in the way, the expectations of consistently pushing out content versus actually making art. There's a difference, obviously. There's a timeliness, there's a meaningfulness, there's work that goes in through it. And it's not to say that content isn't that, but content are two different things. And it's hard for an artist, how can artists be successful with those as just in the background all the time? Those two main pieces in the background all the time, this push to always be putting stuff out there and, billionaires saying, this is what art is. And this is how your art's going to get seen on social media.
Great question. And if I had the answer, Rob, we'd all be rich. There is so much noise. There's so much noise. And I have to block it out for myself. Like I have to go off of social media, stay away from that, go on sometimes, but not go on other times. And really like operate from the place of what do I have to say? Like, what am I trying to express? What is the reason that I am sitting here with this paint or this pen or this camera? Like, what is my expression here? And I have had to really divorce my expression from the reception my expression receives. Right? Like commercial success, I don't know how to answer that question in terms of like how we do, but for me, the success as an artist is to authentically produce something that is meaningful and then to put it before other people so that they can respond to it. And sometimes for me, that second part is the harder part than the producing, right? It's the like that vulnerability of I now put it before you and you're going to have a judgment about it. But like divorcing it from the way it's received and just letting it be the offering, for me, that's where that's where the inner success lies.
Yeah. Well said. And I think what happens is follow that noise that's out there and the other things that make a part of it that I don't know if bad actors is what I wanted to use it as, but let's just for brevity's sake, let's just call it bad actors. That's going to get washed away. Authenticity always kind of like prevails at the end of the day. And when you see it and you're like, I don't know if that person's really making good stuff. And it's like, show me your work. How do you do this? What's your process again? Oh, you're just the face that's art's behind or what have you.
Well, I think another thing I remind myself of often is that no art is going to appeal to every person, right? Like somebody hopefully will respond to what you put out, what I put out, what he puts out, what she puts out, that if it impacts one person, that's success. If it's a ripple in a pond and then that person impacts another person, that's success. So for me, it's also remembering that it's not about the number of likes or the number of red dots in the gallery show. It's about having my work be in relationship with people.
I love that. And I think that's a good spot for us to stop because we keyed in on reminders again. I like that.
Yeah.
So with that, I want to move into some rapid fire questions. I have as many rapid fire questions now as my real questions. So thank you.
Okay. I'm ready for it.
So brevity is key here, as you know.
Okay.
And so I want to start off with, what is your favorite flower?
Well, the tulip.
All right. Are you driven more by curiosity, passion, frustration, or something else when it comes to your work?
Curiosity.
What is your favorite time to work? It can be a time of the year, time of the day.
Springtime.
It makes sense. Everything is in bloom, right? Aside from money, because money is too obvious, what would you say 3 things that an artist needs?
Time, space, and confidence.
Yeah. Time, space, and confidence. What is the most powerful word? Because we can't forget the writing component of your practice. What is the most powerful word at your disposal? It can be English. It could be another language. If you speak another language, what is the most powerful word at your disposal?
Love.
Tell me some good news.
Ooh. I'll tell you some good news. Tomorrow is election day, and we have the chance to vote for the world we want to live in.
And lastly, what was the card that you pulled today?
Ooh, open the window. That's why I had to go close it right before we started. Open the window.
That's great. That's great. And I want to thank you for being on this podcast. Gratitude for being on this podcast. And I want to invite and encourage you to tell the listeners where to find you at, where to check out your website, your social media, all of that good stuff. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me. It was wonderful talking with you. I have a website, EmilyGainesDemsky.com. And on Instagram, you can find me at Shining Egg.
And there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Emily Gaines Demsky for coming on to the podcast and chopping it up with me. It's great to learn more about her work. And for Emily, I am Rob Lee, saying that there's art in and around your neck of the woods. You just have to look for it.